Friends, welcome to our first episode of the series Together with a Higher Purpose, where we interview couples who are walking the tightrope of spirituality while managing family life. We really would like to understand how these couples actually manage their time and all the different responsibilities, be it family, friends, children, careers, the spiritual practices, sadhana, and so on and so forth. Too often, people relate spirituality with isolation or with detachment or forsaking responsibilities. There's a notion that people need to go to the caves, go to the forests, go to the Himalayas to search for God, to search for the truth. So the idea behind the series is to actually talk to couples who are living this truth and understand from them as to how they do it. So for a first episode, it gives me great pleasure to welcome two very dear friends, Madhu and Preethi. Madhu is the CEO of Mohanji Foundation, and he's also closely associated with the Himalayan school, which promotes traditional art forms, which is also founded by Mohanji. And he also runs a commercial venture called the Water and Light Applications. Preethi, on the other hand, in addition to handling the family, also wears multiple hats within the Mohanji Foundation. She leads Consciousness Kriya, and she also is closely associated with the Early Birds Club and Invest in Awareness. So welcome, Madhu and Preethi, and I really want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to do this episode for us.
Thank you for inviting us, Rajesh.
Thank you, Rajesh. It's always a pleasure and fun to talk to you.
So my very first question is, can you give us a brief background of yourselves and your tryst with spirituality?
Okay, I go in first. Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Ladies
So I start my tryst with spirituality started with the autobiography of a yogi book. I read this when I was around 22, 23 years old, and I had jaundice at that time. And something about that book was unputdownable. It was an amazing read. I mean, anybody who's read it will vouch for that.
Of course. Yeah.
And in that entire book, what caught my attention was Mahavatar Babaji. Some deep connect happened with him, and I felt like this was something really real. Because after that book, I promptly put down that book after I finished, and from this entire bookshelf, I picked up another book called Living with the Himalayan Masters. And this was another genre, by another master, and not from the same, the lineage, so to speak. And there, once again, there was this mention of Babaji. So for me, a deep connect I had with a master was Babaji. We also have, as a family, we've also known a lot of masters, and I've grown up in a house which had pictures of Ramana Maharishi, which had pictures of Nityanand Bhagwan, and Yogi Ram Surat Kumar, Kanchi Periyava. So all these pictures have always been there in our walls, but they didn't connect to me as such. Of course, Shirdi Baba was like always a grandfather figure. So when I would get myself into trouble, I would pray and say, please help me out. But otherwise, there's never been like a connect. So my connect with a guru happened with Babaji. And I read these two books, and then after that, life became the usual, the usual running behind your career choices. And I got married. Then I met Madhu, who got married, and I moved to Bombay. And here I took on a more serious kind of a role. I did a few courses, changed my track from IT into a consulting line, and I was working with one of the big fours. Then what happened was slowly I realized it was all a struggle about managing your life, your stress at work, and then family and all of that. Then once children happened, what happened? I was really struggling to balance my work life, because the work. We would travel a lot of time. I had small kids. I went back to work after my first child. I was struggling between wearing my hat as a mother as well as a working professional. So then what happened is I wanted to take a break at that point of time. And also I ended up with a lot of medical issues. Like I was having weaknesses, and I was having issues. I had gout, beginning stages of gout. And I started reading self-help books. I started reading, books which are typical books like You Can Heal Your Life by Louis Hay and things like that. And I understood the mind-body connection there. And I realized that there was something much more deeper than, just physical, issues that we have. They all manifest at a very deep level. it starts from the mind. And also there is something else deeper down than that also, and that kind of connected me back to the autobiography of a yogi kind of book, and I started working on myself, because I think around the time, after 10 years of your marriage, you have a lot of things that you can work on, whether it's your relationships, whether it's your expectations, your ownerships, and things like that. So I was kind of balancing and trying to find myself. And that's when, through one of my very dear friends called Saisha, I met Mohanji. And so that's how I met Mohanji. What about you?
Well, actually, my answer is very short. I met Mohanji when she met Mohanji, because she wanted to meet Mohanji. I have, my family has always been a very traditional, I'm from a South Indian family, very traditional family in Chennai. As she's also from Chennai, but so we've always been traditional, worshipping God, all the deities. We're from a Vaishnavite family, so Vishnu worship was the predominant method in our family. So that's always been part of my growing up and part of the practices and personality. I read autobiography of a yogi, I think maybe 2005 or so, and that kind of blew my mind, because I had never imagined that there could be the kind of experiences and the kind of dimensions that the book talks about. It opened my mind to a completely different world. I hadn't connected with any spiritual masters as such. Of course, Shirdi Sai Baba was a presence in our house as well. And I visited Shirdi in the 90s, in the early 2000s. I visited a few times. But at that point, I didn't quite make the difference. I mean, we would worship Shirdi Sai Baba just like we would worship any other temple. I didn't have quite the awareness of what the difference was, or what the difference in his. I mean, I had not read Satcharitra or anything at that time. So, cut to 2014, when we met Mohanji, she wanted to meet him, and I went along, and I had a first meeting with him, which I thought was, I went in with no expectations. So, in the first meeting, the way he came across was a very practical, down to earth kind of a person who answered my questions with no great scriptural references, but in very simple, easy to understand words. And that appealed to me, because that was not my conception of what a spiritual person was meant to be. So this again opened a new dimension, that spirituality does not mean like a very esoteric, exclusive world. A few days after that, there was a Power of Purity meditation that was being held in Bombay, and Mohanji himself was presiding over it, and there was also a satsang. We attended that as well, and that was my first two interactions with Mohanji. And a few months later, we attended this 10-day retreat where you were also there, Rajesh, in Haridwar and Rishikesh. This was the end of October and early November of 2014. So I would say that 10-day retreat in Rishikesh is kind of like a turning point as far as my twist with spirituality is concerned. Because
one thing I wanted to ask you was, I remember it was your 10th anniversary when you came to the Rishikesh retreat, or one of the days, obviously one of the 9 days, and you had spoken, or you had gone to take blessings from Mohanji. Can you just talk about that small episode?
Yes, I remember, because it was, first of all, going for this retreat was itself a big, in hindsight, I think it was orchestrated, I would say, because I wanted, when we went and met Mohanji, there was Kailash happening, and that was happening in 2-3 months. I was 2-3 weeks. Okay, it was happening in 2-3 weeks, and I've always wanted to go to Kailash. So there was something in me which was like, very attracted to that. And then there was this Rishikesh retreat happening. We knew our friends were joining for the retreat, because they said that they would like to go. The same friends that we spoke, Saisha and Manoj. So as soon as I saw this, I really wanted to go, and it was actually around the same time that our 10th anniversary was. So I thought something landmark we could do, 10th anniversary, go to some, rather than going to the same stuff, same places, going to a foreign country, going abroad, doing this, why not go to Rishikesh and Haridwar, go and have this experience with a spiritual master. When I said this to Madhu, he was like, what?
I can understand.
Is this some trick?
She's being very polite. I said, basically, have you lost it?
I can understand your reaction. It's like, dude, are you serious?
So he's like, is this some trick question? What the hell is she trying to do with?
So I kind of evaded the question for a few weeks because
Yeah.
initial response was no, but she was still very keen on it. So I said, okay,
Persistent,
let's see. I evaded it for a few weeks. Then it came to the point where we had to make a commitment because the spaces were closing.
Closing,
So,
yeah.
we got a follow-up message from, Sandeep Mishra, who was Mohanji's PA at that point of time. We had to make a decision. So one fine day that when the deadline approached and there was no opportunity to postpone anymore, I said, okay, fine, let's go. We'll see what happens.
Let's do it.
So as it happens, we spent our 10th anniversary. We were in Lakshman Jula for our 10th anniversary. In Rishikesh.
So
Yeah, but I think it was one of maybe the best decisions we made. I mean, in
Of
hindsight,
course.
and I'm very happy that I didn't use too much of my analytical thinking to not do it. So I'm quite happy that that happened. So on our anniversary on the first, during that retreat, because everybody had their turn to go and meet Mohanji for their one-on-ones and so on. Because it wasn't yet our turn, we went and approached Sandeep and said, it's our anniversary, we'd like to get his blessing. At that point, this is like maybe fourth day or fifth day of the retreat, if I remember correctly. And Mohanji wasn't particularly well that day. He was, I think, down with a cold or something like that. So we were asked to wait for some time. And then when we went and met Mohanji, he's very warm, I mean, as usual. And he was talking to us. I think he was holding Preethi's hand. He was checking a pulse. Something like that was going on. And I remember he said, there are lots of people that get married, that go through their lives. They marry, they have, good house, they have a good family, they have children, then they get old, then they retire, then they die. So there's lots of people that do this in the world, and that's also fine. But you have the opportunity but there are millions of people who are looking for some help. There is so much that the world needs. If you are together, make it count. See how you can do something to benefit the world. I'm paraphrasing, these weren't the exact words, but in a sense he said, make your life meaningful. And how can you make it meaningful? By doing something to benefit the world, so that there are other people that are benefiting by your existence, or the world is benefiting by your existence and by your togetherness. So this was the crux of the message that he gave us on the anniversary. This was our 10th anniversary, 2014. And I think that's what I really remember out of it.
Yeah, and at that time for us it was like, wow, because I mean, who will not like to do this, right? Have your married life, have everything that you're doing now, plus doing good for the world. I mean, we didn't understand the what we were looking at.
What came next?
Very prophetic.
We said, thank you, so grateful. We are we are good for the family. Also, we're continuing this as well as we're doing good for the world. And it seemed like an amazing blessing to have got even at that time, though the way we looked at it was totally different.
Smaller, of course.
The almost similar lines he said was, make your life more meaningful by adding a little bit more value to the world. So he said something like, when you die, the world should have been a slightly better place to live in, rather than the way you have actually got it from your you had inherited the world. And if you could contribute to that, then that's a life well lived. So this is what I bless you with, is what he said. And it feels good to understand or to know that 7 years after that, we are in the same journey towards doing something, in the same direction. Now, I'm not saying I'm contributing positively to the world, but what I am saying is I am walking in that path where I would like to do that, and that itself is amazing. And I'm hoping to reach there where we can add value to the world. And a lot of the activities that we involve in are towards the same direction. So it's almost like amazing to realize that 10th anniversary was like, literally something which was set in stone for us.
So actually, interestingly, the name of a series is also based on that, Together for a Higher Purpose. Because the thing is, I remember, I think maybe a few years back, there was an astrologer who came and said that you'll get married. And I got it really frightened me. And I told Mohanji, you got to stop this. You can't make this happen. So then I asked him, on a more serious note, I asked him saying, is marriage required? And at that point in time, his answer was that if it's meant to be for a higher purpose, it makes absolute sense. If both of you together grow higher, it makes sense. If both of you together can do something better for the world, it makes sense. So I think even his view of marriage was always that two are better, that the sum of two is better than two people are better than one. So if that can happen, it's fine. But if you're just going to live a very rudimentary, primitive, or just a mundane life, I think that is something that he thinks it's a wasted opportunity, because I think that's thing. Now, knowing, I think Mohanji was being prophetic at that point in time when he said that, live a life. I think he was blessing you with that life rather than hinting that something is possible. And looking at where you are 7 years hence, like Madhu's now almost taken up the role of CEO of Mohanji Foundation. You yourself have been through multiple avatars, are doing a lot of work within the foundation. So how did you, from that point where you're just acquainted to Mohanji and maybe doing a little bit of service on the side, to now being service being a big component of your personal lives? So how did that journey actually happen?
I'll maybe go first on this. I think Mohanji's words probably marked the start of the journey, because at the end of the retreat, I remember I said that I'd like to help, and at that point, I told him I'd really like to help with yoga, because I mean, Sanjay sir was teaching us yoga in that retreat, and I just adored the way he was doing, and I'm a big fan of Sanjay sir, though he's not with us anymore. But so I said I would like to help with yoga. And then I connected with whoever was, handling the foundation's activities at that point. There were a few people, and I started helping with transcribing and little tasks which I could manage along with whatever other responsibilities I had with work. I was in a startup. I co-founded this 10 years ago, incidentally. So that started in 2004 as well. So that was also beyond the 10-year mark, and we were still going through a lot of upheavals and challenges, and things were expanding. So I had a very busy work life. I started doing volunteering with transcriptions and doing little other things. We worked together, Rajesh, you, me, Preethi. We were the initial team that started doing work on reactivating the Mumbai Center for Mohanji Foundation. Right. So that began to take a little more time. When in 2015, there were a couple of programs that I had the opportunity to organize. The first was the Kumbh Mela in Nashik, and because we are in Bombay and Nashik is close by, I started helping with the logistics, and that was my first experience with helping with organizing one of the Mohanji Foundation programs. Yes. Later in the year, there was another program in the south of India in Tamil Nadu in Kumbakonam, the Conchitharpur Retreat, and because it was Tamil Nadu and that's where our origins are, and we had some connections and of course the language, I gravitated towards taking on a role with organizing that as well, or rather helping with the organization. Mamu was the key person in it, but I became the local contact for a lot of things. So I think most of 2015 and perhaps a lot of 2016 as well was involvement with programs and so on. 2016 we had the Kailash Yatra, which I would think is one of the big, turning point for us in our journey. Both Preethi and I had the opportunity to go. Some more family members from our family members also attended. The Kailash.
His sister went.
My sister,
went.
her aunt, her uncle.
My mom was keen to go, but unfortunately she couldn't because she didn't.
Yeah, they changed the age limits that time. So 2016 was again in more activities with Mohanji Foundation, and I also began to get the opportunity to travel a little bit with him, which is also always transformative because you get to spend time physically with him. Around this time, around 2016, 17, 18, I was also going through transitions in my professional life. I had already spent 13, 14 years or 13 plus years in it, and there were different situations of varying levels of complexity, which I won't get into here. But I was navigating a fairly challenging phase from multiple fronts, not just on the work front, but there were legal ramifications to it, there were financial ramifications to it, there were interpersonal ramifications, and it was quite a complex situation. And I used to turn to Mohanji for counsel and advice on how to deal with all of it. And I think his advice and his guidance and his protection really helped me navigate that phase in a fairly balanced manner. I related my entire war story to some other people, and they say, how did you retain your sanity in all of it? And I always maintain, I think I maintained my sanity because I knew that, I have a higher power kind of standing behind me and protecting me. And all this activity that I was doing for Mohanji Foundation worked like an anchor. It kept me very stable.
Right. grounded.
Come 2018, I had almost completed my transition out of it. So I had to make a choice of what next. Do I go back into a corporate life, or do I pursue new opportunities, or what should I do? So I took some time off. I did some consulting work with one of my old. I used to work in Accenture long ago before I started this company. So I worked with him for a few months, and I later decided about 6 or 7 months later that my heart wasn't in it. I couldn't really energize myself. It wasn't something that I was feeling a sense of fulfillment from going into a company where my stakes were relatively low. I was just doing a job and I had to come back. I'd gotten too used to autonomy, to doing something fresh, to building something, to feeling the rush of actually creating something. So I'd gotten too used to it, and I didn't have a clear picture of what I was supposed to do, but I knew what I didn't want to do. One thing I knew I wanted to do was to not compromise on the time I was serving for Mohanji Foundation, because it was very evident to me that that was my sheet anchor.
Correct.
That was what was keeping me stable, and that's what filled me with energy. So, that became a constant. So I had to work around to see what do I do from a professional angle, because, I'm not 60, I'm still in my mid 40s, so I still have a career, I have family responsibilities and all, right?
Yeah.
So the beautiful thing is that doors started opening, because once I started keeping, Mohanji and Mohanji Foundation and the spiritual seva or the social seva around that as something that is critical to me and not a non-negotiable, connections via Mohanji, connections via the work that I'm doing started opening up. And that's what led to the opportunity with water and light applications, where we're dealing with coherent water. I met these great, dear friends of mine now, Dutch partners, Dolph and Eric. I was introduced to them from Mohanji, initially in the context of work that we wanted to do for Mohanji Foundation. That's interesting. But it kind of morphed over time into a commercial venture, which will eventually also have a social wing in it. So that's how that opportunity, came up. And in 2018, perhaps the latter part of 2018, when I was at this crossroads, I remember there was this conversation with Mohanji when he had come back from a trip abroad. I think he had attended a convention or a multi-faith conference, something like that. And he came back and he said, there are so many doors opening for us. There's going to be a huge amount of expansion and a lot of work that we have to do. We need people who can go and represent us, who can take charge of initiatives, and we need to do this. He was also conceptualizing the World Consciousness Alliance at that point. And he said, all these things are coming up and we really need people to actually do. What do you think? And there was no suggestion from his side, but the conversation. Somehow at the end of the conversation, I actually said, okay, I'm going to commit to do this. He didn't ask. He just talked about what is the vision, what is the requirement that needs to be done. And he said, we need to find a way to actually solve this. And I jumped and said, okay, I'm going to do it. So he thought for like a few seconds and he said, okay, are you sure? I said, yeah, I'm sure. He said, this is not going to be comfort zone based. You will have to drop your fears. You'll have to drop your insecurities. And only then this will work. I said, yeah, sure. If you're blessing me that I'll be able to do it, I'll do it. So he said, Tathastu, and that was it. And then a few months later, I discovered that he wanted me to assume the role of CEO. So the beginning of 2019 is when I came out of my consulting stint, and then I took on this role of CEO. And now it's been more than 2 years, and there's more and more work that's happened, from then. So that has been expanding. My role with Himalayan School also started, around 2017, 2018, along with Sanjay sir and Devi and of course Mohanji. That is also slowly taking shape. And in 2019, late 2019, somewhere is when we started this venture on water and light applications. So that's also a startup. So effectively, if I look at it, I was in one startup. I'm now in maybe 3 startups and more. So, in a sense, my work scope has expanded tremendously. But the beautiful thing is everything is uplifting. Everything is energizing.
Right.
So I'm busier than I ever was, but I'm also more fulfilled than I ever was, even when I was busy even before, because that I think is something I can't do without. But I think it is far more energizing, and I can see how various parts of, one's definition of life, right? There is family, there is a work, there is a profession, there is fulfillment, there is service to society, how they're all kind of merging together through this one portal called Mohanji. So I think that's what I've seen to be emerging naturally over time. I did not plan this. Neither did I make it clear.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is one thing that I've noticed a lot with the people who have been with Mohanji for a while, because naturally, I think the right word to use is fulfillment, and the platform is that Mohanji provides is that people tend to gravitate towards what they do best and what they love to do best, and they tend to get that energization, empowerment, energy, and empowerment to do that. So they actually naturally come down to dropping off things which are probably a little bit more heavier, or things which are not probably good for them, or which they did not like but wanted to do for the purpose of earning money, but they tend to gravitate to what they like and what they do. So I think that's a very, very important thing that I've noticed on this platform.
Yeah.
And Preethi, I know with you, I think you obviously had to manage family, parents, in-laws, and the family life in particular, because that was traditionally your role. But yet you seem to be very active with the foundation in terms of, I think, consciousness kriya is a passion for you, Early Birds Club, and now with Invest with Awareness. So how did you start out from that background of, I think, that blessing from Mohanji, and reach to where you are today?
So basically, it all started with the Mumbai Center. Rajesh, you were also there. And what
Yeah.
happened?
I think the thing is, the joke. I think the joke. Anyway, I'll say it because thing is, the joke is I was supposed to start the Mumbai Center, but I think after 4 or 5 months, I think I happened to quit my job, quit Bombay, and go to join Mohanji. So I think I didn't have anybody else. The thing is, I had actually convinced, or actually Madhu and Preethi had offered. Preethi had actually offered her therapy center first, and then later on, when that closed down, they offered their graciously offered their house for the meditations. And then later on, what happened is I left, and I'm like, Madhu, Preethi, since it's your house anyway, why don't you take over the Mumbai center? So, so I think it was very funny, and I remember Preethi telling me, saying, "You started this, but you're dumping and running."
Yeah.
So I think she
No, but I
she
think
gave me
you
grief for
stuck
a
to the
month.
definition well. You started. You didn't beyond it.
I did. Exactly. So I think the Mumbai Center, yeah,
It
yeah. Please go
started
ahead.
there. I mean, while it's funny, I think it was all, as Madhu said, things flowed. So we finished this beautiful retreat, came back, and then that's when we connected to you, Rajesh, and I think we had our first meditation session, and then satsang with Mohanji, and from there we said let's start restart the Mumbai Center. And at that time, I was in a full-fledged healing practice. So I was doing healing, counseling, and doing these programs and workshops and all of that. And I had my own small space. And we said that, and there was a picture of Mohanji there earlier, where there used to be Babaji, because by then it was pretty evident to me through a lot of synchronicity and through a lot of people from various angles telling me this is your guru, and the tradition has given you what you actually wanted. So and so I would connect to Mohanji and I would do healings. It was doing extremely well, and at that point of time, at that particular phase, was when the Mumbai Center happened. And initially, as he said, he would conduct meditations, and but the space was available. Then over time, as you had to transition out, we started doing regular meditations. So that's how it all started. Then with Madhu and I pitching in for a couple of retreats to help out and things like that, we slowly got more active. Now at the one point of time, I remember you kind of connected with me and you asked me if I would like to take up consciousness kriya, and then I think I had a couple of conversations with Mohanji, and then it was a really small team. Now it's really interesting, and it's very fulfilling to know the amount of people who have volunteered and who are actually keeping it alive. I mean, and running and doing such an amazing job. I don't do much now. It's running. It has a life of its own, and there are amazing volunteers working on it. I'm just holding the place there. But at that time, that there was only one of us, and I used to manage all the aspects of that. And what was amazing was when you get these applications and when you had to review them and things like that, it opened you moved beyond just a person to actually connect to a higher space to actually review. So you take and put aside all your personal prejudices and things like that, and you kind of work with the application. So the entire process actually connected me much more to Mohanji, the consciousness kriya volunteering practice. And then slowly the right people came. and a lot of people volunteered and things like that. And then I had more time. So with that, the Acharya program happened, and I had a deep call to actually join in, and we wanted to become an Acharya. And I knew it was not easy, because the first, just at the application level itself, when I connected to Mohanji to ask him if this was to be done, he said the same thing that he told Madhu. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be a cakewalk. When you are like a devotee or a disciple or somebody who's following, a guru, it's one thing. But when you're working for the mission kind of empowers you, really empowers you. And along with that empowerment, there's a huge responsibility. The responsibility is that you do not stay in your comfort zone. You allow them to burn what is not required. And a lot of times we're the ones who are holding tight and saying we want these aspects of us. So definitely initially, it was really not easy to move out of comfort zone. But slowly now there's a pattern to this whole thing. You start, every time there's a resistance, that's a comfort zone broken, and the lightness that you feel later. So you feel empowered enough to continue with it and to take the strides which are required to take. So from then opportunities came, for me to do Acharya programs. After that, early bird. I mean, I think our most busiest was during the COVID times. When the lockdown happened, and a lot of people had a lot of free time, they didn't know what to do, they were going crazy. We were like the most busy. And in fact, the joke in the house was like both my kids were in 2 rooms, and Madhu and I were in different rooms, and we were like furiously working, and they were doing their schools, of course. So we were very, very busy during the COVID times. A lot of initiatives started. The Early Birds Club was one such thing. And it's been really empowering, to see how this thing works, even personally, not only in, working with the platform, but also when you practice these things in your own life, you become much more efficient. So you realize that whenever you're talking something, it's with conviction, because you've practiced it in your life. Nothing, I think, I remember Mohanji said this once, he said, please do not speak, nobody wants to mouth my teachings. Let your life be your teachings. And I think somewhere we've always made sure that's the way it is when we interact. Whether it is volunteering, we first, we're volunteering, and then we're seeing the benefits. And from that space, when you're actually talking, you're actually talking about your personal, your personal experiences. And that's the same way when it comes to the various organizations, or the various platforms that, we volunteer for Mohanji, because whether it is the Early Birds Club or the Invest in Awareness, the program is transformational in Invest in Awareness. We've actually gone through this ourselves. And then with that conviction, when you're talking, and we're vulnerably, telling people about what's changed in us, it is much, much more powerful, because there is not something, we're not parroting something here. We're only talking about transformations, and we are our own examples. So I find that extremely fulfilling. And of course, my role is not as active as probably Madhu's is, because I have a responsibility to also make sure that the family is running. I don't do everything myself. I do a lot of organizing to ensure that whatever is required is taken care of. And somewhere efficiency is also something that I've picked up, or I'm learning and I'm evolving with. So it's been a very fulfilling journey, I could say.
So one point that you mentioned about family, right? Since you mentioned that, one thing I've noticed is, I've been knowing your family well. I think your parents, your children are now kind of accepted the significance of Mohanji in your lives, or the work in your lives. Even the part where you do this service, the volunteering, they accept that as a natural part of you. So starting from where you were, where it slowly started growing, I'm sure they must also have had doubts about who this person is, who is this guru, why they're doing so much work. And also accepting, because it takes away, or there's a perception that it takes away from their family time. So how did that transition happen, where there may have been doubts, there may have been questions, to being accepting of this part of your life within your family, within your children, within friends, and so on?
So basically, one good thing is, I think we are blessed with families which are a lot more open. And by and large, when we started something, we didn't jump head on. What happened was, they've also been watching us connect with Mohanji, first meet him, then do this, program with him, then start slowly doing volunteering, had when the center used to happen, my mom as well as my mom and dad, and Madhu's parents were, whenever they were around, they would attend the program, and it would actually make a benefit. It was very beneficial for all of us. Then when this retreat happened in the south, it was almost like a family retreat, because I had Madhu's
I
parents,
remember.
my parents,
Actually,
my aunt, my sister.
the thing is, over time, most of our family has actually
Families.
had the opportunity to meet, talk to Mohanji, even attend retreats. My sister is also very deeply connected to Mohanji, so she's connected. She works with ACT Foundation. She heads ACT Foundation in the US. So I think various people in our families. Her sister is very connected. Her aunt is very connected to. I mean, she's a core member of the Himalayan School of Yoga.
And my other aunt is also.
Yeah, she has other aunts who are also very closely
Closely.
involved in the
Yes.
mission. Rekha.
Yes.
So I think that's a huge positive.
Yes.
Obsessed.
No, I think, I mean, to add to what Preethi was saying, one, it's been a matter of time. It's not been overnight. One fine day, we just junked everything and we jumped onto the ship and said, that world is gone, this world is on. So it's been a transition. I mean, the role of Mohanji Foundation and Mohanji platforms in our life has organically evolved over, let's say, the last 5 to 6 years, particularly more over the last 3 years after I took on a more dramatically more active role. That's one. I think the time has been a factor for people to see. Second, a lot of them have had the chance to interact with Mohanji and know what he stands for. Everybody knows that Mohanji emphasizes putra dharma and family dharma. Not just as words, but also in the way he himself leads his life. Yeah. So people have, at least in our family, they understand very clearly that this man speaks practical sense. There is spiritual depth in what he's talking. There is several dimensions to his personality. We as somebody associated with him for many years still cannot fathom, and even more so the others. But I think that doesn't matter, because what they can see is the work that is happening in the Mohanji platform at a global level. It's not trivial, right? I mean, it's huge. And there is a deep purpose behind each of that, which I think people appreciate, in the family. And I think from our side, we've been very open about it. So it is not like we are working in a black box and people don't know. We enter into a room in the morning, and there is some secret work that happens. And at the end of the day, we emerge and they have no idea what is happening. Everybody in our family knows what we're working on. They may not know the nuts and bolts. It's not relevant.
One thing I feel is, one thing I wanted to touch upon is, because I know a lot of people who do good in the world as well, right? End of the day, there's the concept of me time or family time. So what people think is, even though they accept the fact that you're doing good, they accept the fact that what you're doing makes sense, but I still feel that people have that sense of, you need to spend more time with it, because obviously it takes time away from them, and a significant amount of time. So in that sense,
I'll answer that.
How do you handle that? Yeah, the expectations.
The thing is, right? So just to finish the point I was saying, I think we've been pretty open about what we are doing, so people know what we're working on, and that's not just parents, but also our children. So our children also know what we are working on. I said I have 3 jobs, right? At the minimum count that I have, they know it because I've explained it in so many words to them. So we've been pretty transparent about what we are doing and saying that we're doing something for the betterment of the world, and this is what makes us happy. And and we have not compromised on any of our duties. That angle is also important. It's not like we've neglected anybody. There is always a time challenge, and I'll touch on that now. In my case, right, even before I started doing all of this, it's not like I was coming home at 5:30. I used to come home at 8:30 or 9, and sometimes in midnight. So I was very busy with my work even before this, because I was in a startup. It wasn't like a smooth ride, and I was incredibly busy. The only difference is that when people think that you're doing spiritual work, there is perhaps a notion that you should not be so busy.
Right.
And
right. No, actually, that is the point. I mean, that's a very good point, because I know a lot of people who don't probably see their family on weekends or even during the day. They're probably late in the night and out before the kids get up. But that's somehow acceptable to people, rather than if you're doing volunteering. Right. People think you're crazy if you're doing something which is good for the world. But the same context is somebody doing much worse with not spending time with family, parents. It's fine because they say, oh no, it's working. So as if he's doing something good even though he's doing it only for himself.
Right. And I think that, to my mind, is just a pure concept. I think it's about getting used to it. So if I am clear about what I'm doing and she's clear about what she's doing, and we both of us are 100% clear about what we are doing, I think you just have to go on with it. Over time, people will begin to understand how this is going to play out. Because these things are also, they don't happen. Nothing happens overnight. I mean, whatever Mohanji is trying to do in the world, I mean, they are huge in terms of vision. So you can't expect to see, okay, from what has suddenly changed in you, what has suddenly changed. There is a very big change,
No,
but it
yes,
may
yes.
not be very obvious. So I think it's more your own internal compass and your conviction than anything else.
Also, what I wanted to bring is in all of this, when we've had issues where we wanted to be there for the family, whether it is for children attending their parent teachers meeting, or being there when, as parents, when we're required for a sports day or a program or something, we've not missed anything. We've known so many of our friends who are working in full-time jobs where, they're not, because there's a deadline, there's something coming up, you're not able to go for something. But we've always, like, one of us has kind of adjusted, managed,
Yeah.
and made sure that we've been there for all their programs, for the kids. We've also done our routine holidays. We've also had our times, fun times with kids, and even with parents and with in-laws. We've made sure that we've all spent some time together, some time together. Now, is it as much as we would want or they would want? That's a debatable thing. But at every time, like whether it's my parents' illness or when they had to move from Chennai and move here, or even now very recently when Madhu's dad was not well, we've always been there and we've always been available. So like that, it's beautiful to see how the work that we do, though it's extremely time consuming in terms of we spend a lot of time with the work we do, we're very flexible, and we can always, when it is required, in fact, if at all something is, as I think Madhu had mentioned the other day, if at all there is something which is compromised, it's probably the foundation work, because somebody else steps up in, and we end
To
up
take it up.
taking our responsibilities. So that's something very beautiful, and I probably might not have been able to do this, me or Madhu for that matter, if we were in our full-time jobs that we were in before.
So I think a couple of points that you mentioned, right, is one of the things I think is conviction, and the second thing is communication. So I think your conviction in what you do rubs off on others because they understand that you're in for the long haul, and they understand that if somebody, because most people are logical in that sense, it's not that people suddenly get crazy and do something.
Correct.
But when they see a consistent approach to life over time, they understand that this is meaningful, this is important for you, and also the reasons behind why you're doing it. So I think initially there might be doubts and issues, but eventually they understand that this is something important. And as we do for any of our loved ones, if something is important for them, we adjust to that and make sure that you don't antagonize them on that part. And the second part I feel is communicating. That happens when you have conviction and you communicate what you're doing and why you're doing to your loved ones consistently over time. So then they gradually get it. I mean, even if maybe they might have a little problems in the beginning, but eventually they understand that. And that is what I've seen with your family as well. I think most of your family and your friends are accepting of this part of your life, because they understand that this is what you really would like, or this is something which is non-negotiable on your part. So I think they adjust around to that.
It's absolutely true, because whenever we wanted to go to places or something like that, our parents or Madhu's parents have made sure that they are available here for our children, so that we can leave them with them, and that is one. So they've been extremely supportive of us in these ways.
Right.
Also, our own children, for that matter. So when we leave, it's very easy and very normal for children to say, don't go, do these things, but they understand the bigger purpose. They interact with Mohanji, they interact with the family too, the Mohanji community too, so they know all of them, and so it's a lot more easy. In fact, the joke was, recently I had to leave Anushka and Akshara and go to Bangalore, and I think somebody had mentioned to her that, oh my God, your mom has left you and gone. What will you do? You're having your exams. Exams were happening at that time, and I'd gone for a very short stint because it was required for me to go. And Anushka actually mentioned to her, but I'm independent. I can do it on my own. So the kids are also, it's a myth that we think, kids
They don't understand.
measure up. But when they understand what we're doing and we're consistent about it, the kids manage what they do. And whenever it's required, what happens is we get calls and we say, Mom, this needs to be done, that needs to be done. And we ensure, either me or Madhu, ensure that one of us pick it up. So that's been good. And also with friends, I think it's amazing to see how initially, of course, everyone's apprehensive, right? Because suddenly you're not spending that much time and you're having your own social life is generally with your friends, and then suddenly there is no social life. Of what little is there, you end up going on these programs and things like that. There is a slight apprehension, but over time we've had this amazing set of friends who have understood the larger thing. They might not probably relate to it, but they understand the value that we feel about, or the value that they see, that we see in it, and they've been very accommodating. Not only that, they've been very understanding. In fact, recently about this joke.
Yeah, actually, it's a kind of a inside joke. So we've done holidays with our sets of friends because our children have common age group friends with their children and so on. So when they want to plan the next holiday, the first question they ask is, "You first tell me what is Mohanji's calendar for next programs you're going for. You tell me what slots are available for you. Out of that, then we will plan."
We'll plan around that.
So,
So I think one of the other points that you mentioned, I think which need to be underscored, is that the responsibilities still remain, and the responsibilities are handled the way they need to be handled. In the right amount of time has to be spent on that. There's no shirking or forsaking of responsibilities.
it's
So
not
whether
an
it's your parents, it's not an option, because I think,
not an option.
as Mohanji himself said, that your duty to your children, to your parents stands, and
Right.
it has to be given as much time as is required. Maybe I think obviously everybody expects more time, but
Yeah.
whatever is your duty as a son or a daughter, and as a parent, that is non-negotiable. So I think that, and I've seen you do that. It's not that, I mean, because I've
Yeah,
been with
and
you
I
guys,
think
I've seen.
what is also important to understand in that context, it doesn't mean that you have to physically do everything yourself. Sometimes it's also about
Understood.
making the arrangements to ensure a
Right.
certain thing is done, because physical locations and time availability is not always in such a way that you can physically do
Possible.
everything. But you have to balance that with the ability to create a few support structures or
Support
mechanisms
structures.
which will allow that continuity to happen even when you're not physically able to do that. And
Understood.
of course, that
Understood.
varies depending on the grade of the situation and so on. But I think this is
Of
something
course.
we've tried to do. And I must say, this is also a work in progress, right? There is
Of course.
no
Of course.
perfect optimum, so to speak, that you've hit the balance. I mean, there are peaks and troughs, and there are expectation mismatches, and there are conversations and so on. But, I think we have to just find the best possible route and kind of keep walking.
So while your focus is clear as to what you want to do with your time, at the same time, your priorities our priorities are still the same, in the sense
Yeah.
that the family priorities still remain, whether it's as a career, financial, all the other aspects of
Yeah,
life are there.
I'll
It's
give
just
another
that
recent,
you're more focused. You're
recent
more
example.
focused and more efficient.
Yeah, so our children had their exams last month. I mean, this whole year, they've had online school. And as it so happens, although we're both at home and have hardly traveled this year, other than the last 2-3 months, we've been incredibly busy. So this year, I think we have spent less time with their studies because of this online format than we would normally do.
Right.
But we see what their class teachers are saying and what their report cards are saying now. It just happened a few days ago. They've done better than last year. So maybe the model is we should
It's
interpret
better. You should not teach them anymore. I know, it's like
maybe
they do better when
maybe
you.
we should not be
Teaching
as
them.
Yeah, it sounds like you discovered the problem is you, not them. If you leave them alone, they'll probably do better.
it took a year of hard work to figure out that actually I should not teach them.
I could not. So now we come to a few fun questions. What do you feel? I mean, obviously, in terms of when you've been observing each other as well through this transformation. So, what is the changes that you see? Obviously, the good ones that you see between 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 Madhu and vice versa, and with Preethi. I mean, what do you see in each other? The changes and the transformation on this path.
You'll say I lost.
Because I think I'll tell you the context of it. A lot of things people say, why are you even doing it? Okay, doing good for the world seems like a great value statement, but then even then, I mean, everybody expects something to keep them going. It's like some changes, something positive happening. So in those terms, I mean, if you could tell the audience what is it that has worked for both of you?
Okay, I'll start first.
Yes, please do.
It's-
Tough question. You should answer this.
so okay, so one of the things which is a little clearly evident to me is, see, Madhu is a pretty reserved person as a personality itself, and initially it's a little difficult for him to actually speak his emotions or speak his mind, or communicate in that way. But I've seen this huge kind of change over the last 5-6 years, where he's a lot more forthcoming in terms of communicating. And in relationships, especially, I'm saying, what's running in his mind, what's he working with, and things like that. Because by nature, he's a very action-oriented person. He's not like
Right.
this, communication kind of a person. And I've had a lot of fights with him early on. Now I don't have too much time to fight, which is working out very good for him. But
Thank you, Mohanji.
thank you, Mohanji, too.
Yeah.
So the thing is, in terms of communication and openness, I think I see a huge, of course, things are relative. You can't change personalities completely. One of the things Mohanji tells you is also to accept people as they are.
Accept.
But in that, making it more efficient for two people, especially when you're communicating in relationships, I think I've seen a huge transformation there in him. And it's still a work in progress, as he's saying. So that I see a huge change. Now, the second thing I think is a lot of his earlier his whole, see, I'm a very emotional person, and Madhu is a very analytical, logical kind of a person. So I think I'm also logical, but more emotional, you can say. So what happens is, like, when I speak to him, and if he sees emotions or even any interactions when you have with him, and when he sees emotions, his normal reaction is generally to clam up, completely close down, become the tortoise, move in there, and then whatever you say, nothing has any effect. And if you are emotionally feeling something, then you kind of increase the up, and that's like one whole boom thing which happens, right? But what's amazing now is when I've seen, and especially with the role that he's playing, there's a lot of emotional communication happening. And what's interesting to see is he's able to listen to the whole conversation, pick up the core issue, remove, or kind of not sideline the emotion, and actually tackle the logical core issue, which is the problem in the situation. So a lot of times there are a lot of when you get emotional, you end up saying a lot of things, you kind of doing kind of assuming a lot of things. He's able to very nicely set that aside and actually tackle the core issue. So that way he gets a lot of things done. And I've been noticing that in the last 3-4. I've not probably told him also. I've been noticing that, and that's a huge thing. Whether it is in interactions with me or in external interactions, it's a good thing. It's a real good thing. And anybody who kind of works with core emotional triggers and issues like that, you're able to realize that it is not something which comes easily. You need to work a lot on yourself to actually see such kind of transformation. So I think that's like a huge shift that I've seen in him. Another thing that I've noticed is Madhu is not the kind of, he's very risk averse, so to speak. And it's interesting how his life, from the time that has always been a lot of risk taking. And towards the end, almost like, and he's also a very financial security or uncertainty is not his core work. Dealing with it is not his core strength. And there's a point of time now, I think I deal with such insecurities in a worse kind of fashion, and he's a lot more settled in that. So that's like a huge turning point for, especially if you're a breadwinner, especially if you're like this, guy who's made his career and who's run companies and all. It's very difficult for you to deal with financial insecurities, but I think he's handled it amazingly well. So the last thing that I wanted to speak about when it comes to Madhu's changes is the amount of flexibility that he has as a person. Now, by nature, I don't think Madhu or me were rigid, so to speak. We've been quite flexible as people, but there's a lot more flexibility here when you're dealing with the foundation. Mohanji's thoughts change like this, in the sense like he goes with what is required. He doesn't have a plan and doesn't work like that. Anybody who's working closely with a master realizes that they're very in the moment. So things kind of change. And if you are the plan, strategize, work on a single line kind of a person, it's very difficult to kind of manage that. So I think his flexibility and the way he copes up with different changes and all is been really, really good. So I think I'll stop with that. Too much is happening now.
Yeah. Good
You
question.
can't speak so much good. I know you can't speak so much good about
Never
Madhu.
spoken so much.
I'm hearing it. I've never heard it for 16 years. Thank you. Oh, thank you.
So now your turn.
My turn. I was using the time when she was saying to think. Um, I think there are some commonalities. I think the first point I would say, as far as her transformation or evolution, I think a lot of the insecurities or the emotional vulnerabilities that is dropped, particularly maybe over the last 3 to 4 years. I mean, more so than in the early part of when we started connecting to Mohanji. I think her emotional vulnerability and her general stability from an emotional standpoint and insecurities on various fronts, right? I think that's dramatically come down. And that has a connection to the second thing that is perhaps a more natural flowering of her innate talent. She's quite expressive and good with people and so on. I'm usually people have to pay me money to talk. I mean, I don't like talking unless the work requires me to. I don't. I mean, she on the other hand is more natural
I think
with
they have to
people.
pay me money to stop.
So, so in her case, especially after she became Acharya in late 2018, I think. Uh, she's taken on more of a role with talking to people, counseling, and helping them. Of course, she was doing healing even before she met Mohanji, but that took a kind of a break for a short period in the middle when we were recalibrating, how we go about things. I think that aspect of her ability to connect with people, share personal stories, help people identify what is bothering them, and kind of work towards a solution, not prescribe, but help them work towards a solution. That I think I've seen that develop quite strongly over the last 2 to 3 years. This could be through programs, this could be through one-on-one. There are several people that connect with her one-on-one, and she's giving them some tips and advice, relaying some teachings of Moji that she's imbibed and practiced and how it's helped her in certain situations. And it's always very practical. It's not book theory, right? It's about relating to your situation, how you dealt with it, and people take inspiration from that because that is more real.
Understood.
Rather than like a preachy sermon kind of thing. I think she's come a long way in terms of her ability to do that, which is why when it comes to doing things on Early Birds Club or even in Invest in Awareness, I think she's more naturally suited to doing things like that. It goes back to the point you said earlier. Somehow it so happens that in the Mohanji world, when people who stick for a certain amount of time, they gravitate towards things that accentuate their strengths. My strengths are more perhaps in organizations and projects and interactions on that nature, and I have gravitated towards roles. She is more interpersonal skill, helping people introspect and so on, and she's gravitated towards that role. I think that's the second big change that I've seen. So again, and that energizes her. This is what she loves doing. She enjoys doing it. So I think that also reflects in the third thing, which is because she's comfortable doing what she's doing, I'm comfortable doing what I'm doing. There's very little questioning of why you're doing this, why you're doing that. So the amount of space in the relationship, right? While we are busier than before, it feels like that space has expanded because we're not intruding into each other's space. So in that sense, the relationship has perhaps become broader because there are bits of the large purpose of Mohanji that she's contributing to. There are bits of the large purpose that I'm doing my work towards, and we know that it is all adding into that to that large pyramid that Mohanji is building. So in that sense, I think the space in the relationship is expanded, which is also a natural culmination of how her own personal evolution is kind of going. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that I can immediately.
So there's a very interesting point that you mentioned, that the relationship maturing over time. So I think there were both of you say 10 years back to now, and the thing is, over time, with all the things that you do, can you touch upon those parts, like for example mutual support, and what are the things that are matured in the relationship and actually have grown the relationship forward compared to where you were when you started this journey?
Okay, let me try to answer this, then you can add. Yeah, I think actually the first biggest blessing I would say in our lives is the fact that both of us follow Mohanji. We are following the same master, so there is 100% alignment in terms of our thought process of following from a spiritual path, as well as in terms of the teachings. So there is no different interpretation to what is awareness. So for example, if you're talking about centering on the spine, both of us have the same understanding of it, right? Because it's coming from the same source.
Yeah.
So I think that has a huge role to play in terms of allowing us to smoothen things out. Because if, let us assume, she was following a different master from a different path, I'm following a different master from a different path, there would be points of commonality, but there would also be points of divergence in the method, not in the
Diversion.
goal. So I
Right.
think that in terms of our points of conversation and commonality, right? So a lot of our conversations now become about interpreting some things that, like, she has a situation, then I'm able to use my understanding to tell her maybe it is this, maybe it is that. And when I have situations, she can put her lens and then give me, her tips of what she's seeing. So I think one of the things that has happened over time is we kind of counterbalance each other when somebody has their ups and downs, because we all go through ups and downs. I mean, it's not like it's smooth sailing all the time, right? I mean, I have difficult situations, she has difficult situations, but we're able to lean on each other to ask for an opinion, which I may or may not agree with, and she may or may not agree
Correct.
with, but at least it is food for thought.
Correct.
And it's coming from, of course, a good intention, but also from interpretation of what Mohanji has said. I think that is one key aspect I wanted to touch on.
Yeah. So not only is this, in the way we lead our life, but also when it is the same in terms of our responsibilities. There were times when I had to take, I had to kind of, spend more time with my family, kind of manage my parents and things like that, and be more for them. And that time, when I leave the house, Madhu kind of steps in and he makes sure, see, we have support systems everywhere. So I'm not, but making sure that everything is managed is the role the other person takes in and fills it up. Or if Madhu has to go somewhere, whether he's traveling or he has to go somewhere, then I fill in a role. So of managing more in the house. So there are a lot of these buckets where we fill in for each other too. I mean, not more in terms of the work for the organization, but more in terms of balancing home and work. So even there is a nice partnership which I've begun to see, and that's really good. And there have been times even with our own parents, like if my parents are not well, or if they have certain things that they would like financial advice on, or something like that. If I'm not there, they go to Madhu, and I'm sure Madhu's parents also, when Madhu is not available, they tend to come to me. So it's like a nice synchronicity.
Right.
And we kind of more than synchronicity, I think synergy of things working together, and I think that makes the relationship more meaningful. So it's a unit.
Plus, I think you also grow as individuals. So I think there's a better perspective to life as well, because most of the common triggers, issues, responses are looked at from probably a more when you're growing in spiritual on a spiritual or growing on a spiritual path, you tend to view these things or contemplate on them more to see the source and
Right.
try to avoid them. So has that actually been a factor in your
Yes, it
relationship
has
as
been,
well?
because when you look back at issues that we used to have earlier, we still have them now, but it's a lot more like superficial. Most of the issues that we've had, or couples generally have, boils down to ownerships, expectations. So you expect certain people to, your particular relative or a friend or somebody to behave in a certain way, and when that does not happen, you constantly unhappy, and you're trying to change that person so that you get the desired outcome. Now with this whole, after 14, 15, 16 years of coming together, and then 7 years of knowing Monji and understanding how life works, what you realize is we're actually individuals who have come together for a limited time to actually to move forward for a higher purpose. So while that also gives rise to this whole thing about giving people, or giving each other personal space and freedom to do what we want. So it is not the role which becomes the most important role, most important point of focus, but the role helps you achieve this, because we've taken this role as a parent, or as a spouse, or as or children, both sets of parents, that these are roles, and when we play these roles too, but then there is a larger purpose where we are aligned. So while we might have certain issues with a parenting style, or the way you approach a parent or something like that, the larger vision is always very clear.
Right.
To coming together and walking purposefully towards a larger goal of adding value to the world, so that it can also make changes in our own selves, and lead us to a higher what would you say, higher space of awareness. So that is pretty clear. So everything else, when it comes and goes, is a lot more superficial. Normally when you fight, you're so caught up in that whole game of trying to prove a point, that becomes your focus, right? Here it's very passing. And sometimes we even tell each other, this is your this is your problem. And at that time, it's pretty irritating. Even now, it plays on you, and you know what the other person means.
Yeah.
So that
True.
way, it's a good partnership.
So one of the other questions I had for you was, you've been blessed to actually have been around Mohanji or spent significant time with Mohanji, both together when Mohanji's come to your place, as well as spending time with Mohanji and traveling with him. So, I mean, that's something a lot of people are interested to know, saying that, what are the kind of transformations that happen when you actually live with the master or spend a lot of time in close proximity to the master. And when I say close proximity, it could be physically close to him, but also by virtue of your work, you're in constant communication with him. So in a way, you're always in connection with him on a day-to-day basis. So how does that actually help you do this? How does that help you actually transform? If you can give a few examples.
Start and then you can add on. So our connection, yes, we do spend a lot more time, interacting with Mohanji than normal volunteers do. Because one, as a role as the CEO, probably Madhu has more interactions with him on a regular basis. And for me, I've been I've had the opportunity to actually do some starting work, or kind of work where I had to start or kind of project manage initiatives. And from that perspective, right, I've because it was a starting phase, I've interacted with him a lot more on whether it's Early Birds Club or Investing Awareness. Now, that's more because of the role of work that we do. That's the first thing that I wanted to add. Now, the second is whenever I have had such interactions, one of the biggest takeaway for me has been, the vision with which he looks at things. It's not about do something so 10 people, 15 people, or even people in Bombay or people in India can benefit. The vision is always one, transformational, and it's always larger than life. It's the entire the entire world. It's always 7.8 billion people making changes. And the way one is the way he sees it. The second is the way he thinks. Both of it is extremely inspiring for me. Even small activities that you do, he always thinks it through right from that vision, of a huge, higher, larger than life kind of vision, rather than look at it like, in a very small kind of spectrum. So that is a very inspiring thing for me, and something I would really like to aspire for, because I can't think the way he does. And I'm only hoping that as and when I progress and awareness grows, I start, looking at things in a little larger or bigger picture than I'm currently looking. So that's always been something that I've found extremely interesting. And the other thing about Mohanji is always purpose. He says a lot of times when we are interacting with people, there is our patterns, and then there are other people's patterns, and basically it's just minds talking to each other, right? And he's given us a lot of clarity on this. So he says, put personalities aside and keep the focus on the purpose. So this has been really something I kind of literally hang on to, because in life, when we are interacting with people, there's always our core personalities which come out, and our personality, there are always points where we kind of interact with other people and we might disagree. So whenever things like these have happened, I always go back to that teaching about putting your purpose and behind your behind the person, and in forward, and putting the personality behind. And that's actually helped me navigate a lot of things, and making sure that I'm staying focused. So these are the two things that I can think of, and if you'd like to add something.
Yeah, I mean, I think those 2 points are certainly the top 2 that I would also think of. The third thing I always take away, most of my interactions with Mohanji, whether it is on the phone or whether it is in person, it is invariably related to some aspect of work, because my connection with him is largely work oriented. I very rarely ask him questions about spiritual sadhana, or why am I having this thought process. I mean, I could probably say
Which you already, I think you probably spent a lot of initial years doing that. So you run out of questions probably.
no, I'm not very given to introspection, so maybe I don't even know. I don't ask many questions on that front.
Sorry, I just wanted to I just wanted to highlight this because I think among all of us, I think Madhu used to be the most inquisitive one, and invariably the one who would ask the most detailed questions. So anytime we had a question, we had to pass it on to Madhu because for sure Madhu can't rest without asking Mohanji and getting the answer. I think off late he stopped doing that, but I think last 3 years maybe less. But I mean, he was always the most inquisitive one. Yes, sorry, Madhu, please continue.
Okay, thank you for disrupting my flow of thought. But, beyond the vision and the purpose point that Preethi mentioned, the other thing I find is how practical Mohanji is. He looks at every situation just as it is. There is no preconceived notion. He just flows, right? So one day you might be thinking this is what we want to do for the next week. Then tomorrow you see something else has come up. Then he very coolly changes without thinking, oh, yesterday we had this plan, we had to do all of this. He doesn't, I've never seen that happen. There's always a constant change. And, that flexibility in thinking and what he talks about being in the moment and flowing, you see that even in projects, in day-to-day activities. I think Rajesh, we've made travel calendars, we've made daily plans and so on. But I always joke that I make these plans so that I can watch them disintegrate in front of me. But the net result is never a compromise. It's always meeting, a whole bunch of variables which we obviously did not think about because there was somebody wanting to meet him at one particular time slot, and that happened. It wouldn't have happened if our calendar had followed. Right. So there is perfection in that flow. I think that is something that's very beautiful to watch when you spend physical time with him. And the last thing I would say is how natural he is. There is no edge. We've been on travels. He's gone by a tempo traveler. He's gone by a bus. There are sometimes I've even traveled with him in an auto because that was the most practical way to get to a certain destination. There's absolutely no edge. There's no thing. Oh, I'm a guru. There are so many people following me. 5 people in 5 continents are doting on me. Nothing. That is all we thinking about it. He's saying, I don't need anything. Let's just sit in an auto and go. It'll get us to the other endpoint fastest. Give him 10 rupees extra, 20 rupees extra. Doesn't matter. Make him happy. Let's finish our job and move. So that whole air of naturality and being completely practical on what is required at that point of time, without really thinking about who he is and what we think he is and all that, I find that amazingly refreshing. Right. And it's also very humbling, right? Because if he is doing that, that's a lesson in practice. We may have whatever position, we may think we have this, we are all quite privileged. The people that we are talking and the people perhaps that are also watching, we actually have a lot of privilege, relative to a lot of people in the world. And we have notions of how we should be, how people should see us, how we need to treat ourselves and so on. And a lot of that is over here. And I think Mohanji is a very good example of how not to think on those lines. So I find that extremely refreshing. I think it's not very easy to actually adopt that because it requires a great degree of self-assurance and a complete lack of worry about what's going to happen 2 days later, 3 days later, what others are going to think. He doesn't care. He's very confident that whatever is right will happen. And that is very important to observe, but I'm also saying it's very hard to practice. It's good to keep seeing that from time to time when I see it in practice, and it's a great reminder, but it's very hard to practice. I still try. I think I've made some progress, but this is where it is.
Yeah, actually, other point I wanted to mention over here is the people who are around Mohanji or the people that Mohanji spends time with is only based on purpose. It's never based on I like this person more or that. Right. I've seen a lot of people are not actually connected to him very deeply, but who do a lot of good in the world, and they get to meet him much more often than people are very deeply connected to him as well. Reason being that he only empowers or energizes people for purpose. And it's never, I think a lot of people feel that, some people are lucky. There's no such thing as luck. It's just that if somebody really goes out and does a lot of good in the world, Mohanji makes it a point to go and, even if he doesn't even know them, if somebody asks for time, he'll say, make time for them because it's very important for me to energize them, empower them. So I think I wanted to just highlight the fact that it's not a blessing or something that unique about the person. It's about the work that they do always that gets them more face time with Mohanji.
Yeah.
So, and now on to my final question is, I think it's a beautiful conversation, but I think we can't end up without using your wisdom and your knowledge that you've garnered over the last 15, 16 years. I mean, through School of Hard Knocks. What would it be? What would be your advice to couples that are embarking on a spiritual approach? And this could be followers of Mohanji. This could be like where it's a blessing for you both to be followers of Mohanji, but also where one of them is a follower and another person is either not a follower of spirituality or follow somebody else. So if you could distill, some of those nuggets of wisdom and highlight it to people, I think that would be very, very useful for the audience.
Start first and then you can add on. So I think irrespective of whether you're single, wanting to, get into a committed relationship, or whether you're in a committed relationship, or whether you're married and you've taken the commitment to the next level, I think irrespective of that, one of the biggest things that you need to understand is you need to actually connect and know yourself first. And when I say know myself, it is not about some esoteric self. It's actually knowing yourself. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What ticks you? What gives you satisfaction? Actually looking at everything that is called you without judgments or criticisms. Now, strengths are easy, right? Because it's pretty evident and you can see it. When it comes to weaknesses, a few of them it's still okay, and it's people have told you and you know that these weaknesses are there. But there are these deeper things, so-called weaknesses. I wouldn't even give them a label called a weakness, that you're not even aware of because they're painful to see. You would rather not see such things within you because accepting that is like a huge thing. So having the ability to sit back and look at yourself and know yourself fully without judging them as right or wrong. Just say, okay, this is happening. I am insecure. Things like I'm lazy, I have tamas is a lot more easier to accept rather than things like I could be jealous, or things like I could be I do have this vindictive streak in me when somebody kind of challenges me. Now these are things that you don't want to see, obviously, and you're close to seeing those things. So an ability to actually step outside of yourself and see what's happening is something which is extremely important. And once you do that, you don't need to change yourself. You need to just accept that these things exist with you. When such acceptance happens, right, automatically awareness levels shifts and transformations happen. And once somebody, if you're able to know yourself truly well, you'll also be able to partner well in a relationship, whether it is limited commitment relationship or a long-term commitment relationship. You're able to, once you know what you want, you know what you are, it's a lot more easy for the other person who comes into, because it's only empowering. So from that perspective, I think it's very important to connect with ourselves. The second biggest mistake that I've made in my relationships, whether Madhu more so, but in other things as well, whether it is children, parents, or things like that, or expectations and ownerships. Now, these are huge because a lot of times you think your expectations are pretty reasonable. But what happens is the understanding that each person is a karmic being there is a reason why they've come, and they can express themselves only as they are. So however much you try to change certain people, they have their own karmic blueprint, and they've come here to express life the way they are. This understanding is itself huge, and sometimes you kind of realign yourself so that you all can coexist together. Sometimes you realize that it might not be possible, and then kind of realigning yourself to the relationship. All of this becomes a lot more easier when you see it in a big picture, because end of the day, we're all individuals, and we're all traveling. Things like, even whether you're a parent, whether you're a child, whether you have your own children, or whether you have relationships like this, all of them come and go, and they're all transitory in life. And there's only this one entire experience which kind of continues from one space to the other, right? When we look at life from that perspective, we are able to be more matured in our relationships. Yes, things do happen. Things irritate you. People irritate you. That wet towel on the bed still irritates you. But in the end, you see the bigger, purpose behind the whole thing. So I think perspective-wise, when we are clear, I think life becomes easier.
My turn.
Yes.
See, one lesson is to always let the wife speak first.
Yeah,
It's a
that
very
always helps.
important
This is
lesson.
number one lesson. Number one lesson for yes.
Second lesson is I agree with everything she said.
Wow, wow, wow,
The third thing, which okay, now that I've done with my wisecracks, I think this is not something that you can really plan. That's the key point I would like to make. It's good to reflect on what the journey has been and take lessons from it, and it's good to do that reflection and introspection. But it's not something that you can plan saying this is what I want to do. I think the only commitment somebody can make to themselves, or I mean, as a couple, is what is really important to them. Is this path of spirituality or connecting to yourself something that is really important to you? If that becomes important, then you start taking baby steps towards that, right? In whatever form and fashion. And each person may have their own method. That's completely individualistic. But if they start thinking on those lines, then then let that journey evolve. The second thing that is important for this to actually happen is a certain level of openness of mind. I think we hear Mohanji say many times that destiny brings you to a master, but the mind takes you away, right? And it's very true. And we've seen that in our journey. And I think this is not just in our journey with Mohanji, but with so many people with so many masters. I'll give you an incident to illustrate this. The first time we met Mohanji, right? We said we met after a friend introduced us, and we went and met him. Then we went for a satsang. When we went to the satsang, I didn't know anything about Mohanji, about his history, about who he is, and so on. Shortly after that, we see that his wife is Devi. I mean, at that time, we used to call her Diva, and his daughter Mila, who, of course, we know them very well now, but at that time, that was the first time I ran into them. So I didn't know Mohanji was married and had a family. My conception of a spiritual person or a saint is somebody in saffron who is a sannyasi, who is a renunciate. To see that there is a person who can be at the state that he is in, which is of silence, and bring about and speak to us like a friend, but also have a family, was to me quite challenging to accept at that point of time. So I could have just walked away saying, what kind of a fraud person is this? He has a family. How can he preach to me? And that door would have completely closed to me. So I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. So a little bit of openness, and therefore I think the related point is also the right company, because that also helps in having that openness. We had some friends, and she had the openness, and I went along with her to the retreat, and then everything started opening up after that. So I think that is the third point I would mention, that let things flow, have some commitment to what you want to do, and have that clarity. And in order for that to flower, you need to have openness. If you go in with a lot of concepts and frames, then I think invariably, at some point that doubt or that separation or that door will close, and then you're not on the path anymore. So I think that's a very important thing. It's a watch. It's probably a warning, and it's a warning for ourselves every time as well. But that's something that I would perhaps share, with people that are wanting to make this journey.
So one thing I would probably add to this is the points you made earlier. So one of the things I feel is a lot of times the doubts also may come from the family, friends, children, so on and so forth. So I believe what you said earlier about conviction,
Absolutely.
that your beliefs are resulting from your experiences, which have been true at some point in time. And you need to reflect back on your experiences to know that what you experienced was right and stand by it. Even though if your spouse or your children or your family think otherwise, it's good to stand by that and be there. The second point you mentioned is spirituality is not an escape, or it's not an escape hatch. You don't get into spirituality because you want to run away from family. And the point that Mohanji normally says is that you don't go to the sea because you hate land, because at some point you're going to come back to it.
Correct.
So the point is, I think your responsibilities are equally, and no real master would allow you to forsake your responsibilities, because they always tell you, like I think you had mentioned this sometime back. I remember saying that in the Hindu tradition, it's Mata Pita Guru.
Mata Pita Guru Devam, right?
So which means mother, father, guru, and then God, which means you have to handle your responsibilities first, and the guru comes much after family, and God comes after the guru. So the thing is, in that sense, your responsibilities are primary. They still stay whether you're spiritual or
Yeah.
not. And in that session, once you get on a spiritual path, they become even more important because you need to do things right.
Correct.
Now you have a perspective, so you need to really get those things right. So I think, and the last thing you mentioned was communication. Your way out is to ensure that all your important stakeholders in your life are, you communicate why you're doing on a regular basis. Maybe they get it, maybe they don't, but eventually your diligence, your what do you call it, your
Commitment.
honesty, well, and your commitment, they finally gets to them. So conviction is important, because I think a lot of people can get shaken in the
Right.
by their close, and out of good intentions, not even out of bad. I mean, because they really feel doubts about it. So I think standing strong is actually very, very important, I feel. So I think
Right. I mean,
those 3 points from your earlier conversation, I think
absolutely. I'll add last 2 points maybe. I'm staring at a picture of Sai Baba, so that comes to mind.
Yeah.
You know, Sai Baba always says Shraddha and Saburi, right? So
Shraddha and
the
Saburi.
angle of faith, when you said conviction, but conviction is also another way of explaining faith. There is uncertainty, and this path is not like it's filled with it's not a bed of roses, right? So
Right.
faith is something that helps you navigate that
Navigate
and
to
deal
that.
with
Right.
situations with awareness. So I think that is one aspect, which is maybe another dimension of conviction. Second
Yes.
related thing, because it is not a bed of roses, is patience. That is the Saburi angle.
Patience.
You
Right.
can't go
Right.
in with expectation, seeing that okay, now I'm following Mohanji, day after tomorrow my life will be totally it will be
The flower.
different, but it
Not
cannot be
necessarily
different
on.
in the way that you thought, right? It will be
You
different in
thought
the way
it.
it is evolving. So I think that
Yeah.
patience and perseverance is always also critical. We can't go in with an expectation that everything is going to be rosy from tomorrow onwards. I mean, it will be whatever it is, but you just keep going.
Like I think Devyam used to say that, saying that eventually it will all get better, but you don't know when that will happen. It's for a master, it's lifetimes. So and be prepared for the long haul. So I think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, correct.
that's
Correct.
I think a fair expectation.
Yeah.
So I think with that, I think it's a beautiful conversation, and the only thing is we are short of time, but I think we could go on for hours more. But I think we got to end it here, and I really first would like to thank you for taking the time out and sharing all these beautiful nuggets of wisdom. And the other thing is, I think that I'm sure there are a lot of questions that will come up in this video as people view it, and I would request to help to answer some of them as they come along. So because I'm
Certainly.
sure this will raise up a lot of thoughts with people. So with that, I conclude this episode from my side with a grateful thanks to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rajek. It was fun.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Same here. Jai Mohanji. Jai
Jai
Mohanji.
Thank you.